Hey y'all. So, I figured I'd make a little bit more of a personal video. Sorry for the shakiness, I'm doing what I can. And discuss something that both me and Rajan have in common. And that would be one of our beliefs. So, obviously, we both practice witchcraft, but that's not the belief I'm talking about right now. So, we can make a video about that later if you want, leave it down. But a different belief we both share is therianthropy. Now, for those of you who don't know what therianthropy is, it is definitely not bloody fucking furry. A Therian and a furry are not the same thing. Don't mix them up. Actually, calling a Therian a furry can actually be an incredibly offensive thing to a Therian. While Therians... Sorry, my camera shut off. While Therians sometimes do use some of the same styles that you'll see with furries all the time, the furry fandom and therianthropy as a religious belief is something very, very different for obvious reasons. It's like taking Satanism and saying that someone who's just goth and wearing around the pendulum is a Satanist. You know, it's that same feeling of furry. Okay, so we wear a tail. That's something that's a furry thing, but there's still a huge difference between the two. Now, to get on to which is problems that arise when you are a Therian, is number one, you get mocked all the time by everyone, whether it be that they're calling you a furry, or there's a car passing. Or they're calling you a furry, or just in general making fun of you. You'll oftentimes hear people talk about, like, oh, when you howl, don't blow me away, or don't be too loud. And it can be quite the annoyance. I know I personally, in high school, quit doing choir because my teacher would constantly be mocking me for that belief. And that actually ended up to going into a whole situation where I would not sing for anyone for the time. But you will get bullied. Yes, in fact, Therian hunters do exist, which is always a nice thought in the back of your mind, that if you come out as Therian, someone might go down and be cruel to you purely because of it. Moving on, another thing that you'll notice with Therians and whatnot is that there is more than one type of Therian, and people will instantly assume there's only one type of Therian. And that can be very annoying, because obviously what therianthropy is the belief that your soul is one of an animal's, not a human's. So when you break it down, there are so many different levels of changes between each person. So just like with different animals, there are different things associated with it. And, you don't necessarily assume that a dog is going to be a dog. Not even if it's all dogs, right? If you're only dealing with dogs, there is a huge difference between dealing with a bulldog and dealing with a husky. With the way you treat them, the way you approach them, the way you train them. It's different. And they're going to have their different experiences. So to treat them all as one is not very nice. And then when you get into the, like, species, gender, blends, all that, it becomes even harder. Because then you're saying, like, one of the things that people will do is they'll treat a dog person the same as a wolf person or a cat person. And you do not do that in any means of the way. They're going to react very different depending on what you're doing. 1, a dog is domesticated. 2, the wolf is not. 3, a cat's a feline and the other 2 are canines. You know, so we're going to have very different things. Yes, they all eat meat. Yes, they can all eat a vegetable. But that doesn't mean that they're going to have the same favors as, say, a mouse would. You know? And that's another thing that you'll find different stereotypes that people have installed on them because of movies. Like, obviously a mouse can cook, right? A mouse can cook real well. I can tell you that no, not necessarily. Sometimes they are the worst person you can ever ask to cook a meal for you. So you can't just instantly assume certain things are going to happen a certain way. You can't assume that a certain animal is going to react a certain way, because on top of all the things I've just covered, people have their own history that they've gone through. They have their own thing that happened to them. They have their own story. So, for example, I might react very differently to someone with a specific body type than I would, say, another person with a different body type, because I have a different experience with dealing with someone with a certain body type. So, moving on from that, the differences in the types of Therians in general, like screw everything with the animals, the difference in the types, because there are polytherians, there are just Therians, there's non-shifting Therians, there's shifting Therians. There are so many different things out there. If you want me to make a video about it, I sure can. But it's such a wide variety of things out there that you might have to deal with. And honestly, if you walk up to a Therian, the best case scenario is just to ask them and not just assume. Though usually, depending on who it is, you might be able to identify at least part of it. But as specifically, like me as a polytherian, you'll have people within the own community make fun of polytherians, you know? And to some extent, yeah, I can see why that would be a little bit of an off-put. But in general, like for me, the amount of times I've been told I have a personality disorder. I can't tell you. When it comes to being a Therian, everyone's trying to diagnose you. Just think about that. You cannot walk anywhere, you can't talk to certain people without them being like, oh, you have a personality disorder, or oh, you must be autistic, or oh, this or that, and it just becomes super annoying. And each Therian has their own story as how they found out that they were Therian, how certain things happened that led up to them understanding what, different experiences, how they react to different things. It all is based off of experience, off of how well they know themselves. And in general, it's a very complex way of living as a Therian, but you wouldn't want to live any other way. It's like, if I told you you were now a raccoon, and you could only identify as a raccoon, even though you're a human, you'd be a little bit off-put by that. And you wouldn't necessarily want to identify as a raccoon if you were human. It's that same thing, except for now you're mixing in a different body. Which is why I'll oftentimes talk about, sometimes when people talk about how hard it is to be trans and whatnot, I kind of almost want to laugh, because at least you're the right species. Now granted, if you are trans and the wrong species, I am so freaking sorry. But in general, a trans person at least is the right species. So you can imagine how a Therian person feels out there, where they get mocked all the time, told that they're not a real thing, told that they're a furry, and they're in the wrong body, and they don't even get the right species to live their life in. And on top of that comes up with different things. Like, for example, a lot of them will have chewing problems. And, like, not as in, like, oh yeah, they can't chew, but as, they chew on a lot of things. You'll see them biting on their necklaces, or, just on random things. And yes, indeed, they might just bite you. As much as that seems like, oh yeah, haha, funny, or like, yeah, that's what I totally thought when I thought of a rabid animal. Let's get one thing straight. Therians are not rabid. We know how to work. We know how to function in a society filled with humans. We've learned to camouflage and to look like something other than what we are. But it breaks down into trying to figure out where you are and what you're dealing with. Because obviously, like, you might be more comfortable in a city setting if you came from the city. Someone who came from the woods or who came from the Arctic is going to feel more comfortable in certain settings that mimic that versus settings where it doesn't. So necessarily, if I'm in the woods, I might react very differently than if I'm in the middle of the city to certain things that are like borderline for me. It's going to go from one end to the other, depending on my location. Let's see, what else have I... What else do I have to go? What else do I have to have? English is hard. What else do I have to cover? Woo, got it done. Hopefully I'm speaking loud enough in these videos too. If I'm not, please leave a comment saying to speak up. Let's see. Oh, yeah, another problem that we face. It's like, even if you completely disconnect with everyone else who's around, you're gonna have to deal with your own self. As a Therian, that can be really hard, because as I just covered, there are shifting Therians and non-shifting Therians. When you're a shifting Therian, that means you're actually having to deal with shifts. No, not like werewolves, not like werecats, none of that shit. You don't actually transform into the animal. But it's things like phantom shifts, or phantom limbs, which is actually something that's not that uncommon, even in the human world, where someone gets their arm chopped off and can still feel their arm. It is that way, and it would be like feeling a tail that's not there. You know? Yeah, it does make it harder. And obviously, if you're a polytherian, it makes your life 10 times harder than other Therians where they're just one, or they're two. I had something on my arm. But, in general, dealing with a Therian can be very hard, because similar with someone who's going through dysphoria? Yes, dysphoria. Dysmorphia is the body. Okay. Dysphoria. They're gonna act very differently when they're having a really bad dysphoria versus when they're having a very fine time, they're okay. It's a similar thing, except for we're in the wrong body. So it's not like, man, I wish I had a dick. Or man, I wish I had a vagina. No, it's like, damn it, I wish I had the right body. In the corner. And it can make them really crabby, just like someone who's going through dysphoria can become very, very crabby. So in general, there is just a lot of different things that someone approaching a Therian has to deal with, and a Therian itself has to deal with. And yeah, coming out as a Therian is a very intriguing thing. It's a very intriguing thing, because obviously you'll have people who don't believe in it, you'll have people who make fun of you, and actually, fun fact, it's one of the older religions. A lot of the older religions actually do have something to do with therianthropy. Reincarnation come in? For instance, Native Americans used to believe that oftentimes their spirits would transfer into animals, or animals would transfer into humans. Some tribes, man. Love them to death. So when someone says they're Therian, essentially mocking them is mocking past people who did believe the same thing. But let's see, what else can I say? When it comes to problems with Therians, there's numerous different ones. I don't want this to be too long, and I'm looking at the timer. We're already at 12 minutes. Okay. Actually, past that, because we still have the... Okay. Yeah, we're getting long. I'm going to try and probably tidy this up after a little bit then. But in general, if you guys want me to do another talk about this, leave it down below. I am more than happy, and I can go more into therianthropy if you wish. Why is my dog doing that? You can go more into therianthropy if you want. And the different things. I can go more into telling things about myself. But you have to say that down below in the comment section. I read them. I do. I can read. But, yeah. Also, I would like to say a little something about this pandemic. If you're watching this, it's not the pandemic. Just like, subscribe, notifications, that-ish. Bye. But those of you who are in the pandemic, let's have a little talk. So when it comes to like everything that's going on, I get it. It sucks to be trapped inside, and it sucks to have to deal with certain people that you don't naturally want to deal with. You kind of want to be away from. It sucks to not be able to see certain people that you don't live with. And it sucks that, you know, everything is in shutdown. But let's think towards the bright side, especially since it's Earth Week. Let's see if I can get my hand on camera. It's Earth Week. Where we're actually doing a lot of good things for the Earth. Time away from our children are doing her very well. Certain parts of the Earth that was once like covered in a cloud of pollution now can be seen from space. So much is going on. Earth is reclaiming some of its territory, and it's going great. Let's stop whining and start focusing on the good things, like you can connect more with nature right now. You can take time to do that. You can take time to do a lot of things that you wouldn't naturally do. You can try new things. So essentially, get outside and enjoy that instead of whining and complaining all the time. This isn't the first video that was supposed to go out, I will admit that. I did film one before, and I decided I didn't like it. So, this is why I'm sticking with. And oh, yeah, I finally came up with an outro. So, yeah, notes. This is probably the worst ending I've done so far, but in general, I just want to say, enjoy your time. Try not to whine too much about the pandemic, and just try to make the best out of this time period. Stay adventurous, stay healthy, stay true to yourself, and I love, as well as support, all of you. Fox out.